The desert exhales in slow, patient breaths, as if remembering something it once held close. On certain nights, when the wind drifts low across Giza, the air carries a faint vibration. A hum too gentle for waking ears, yet deep enough to stir the dust. Those who linger long enough beneath the stars sometimes claim to feel it beneath their feet, as though the ground itself were alive, drawing in a hidden breath through chambers no light has touched in thousands of years. The Great Pyramid rises from that silence like a thought made of stone. Its vastness feels less like architecture and more like intention, as if someone long ago wished to trap eternity in shape and sound. When moonlight spills across its worn edges, it catches the faint sheen of limestone once polished to mirror the heavens. In the Old Kingdom, they believed such smoothness could guide the soul upward, reflecting the sun so purely that even the gods might see their own faces in its glow. But the builders knew of another light, one that did not shine but resonated. In their language, the same word could mean breath, spirit, or sound. They believed the earth itself produced tones, deep and sacred, like the resonance of a drum beneath the world. There are tales, half erased from papyri, of priests who carried light stones from the quarries of Aswan. Stones that sang faintly when polished, said to hold a spark from the sun itself. Some fragments speak of rituals performed only at night, beneath sealed ceilings where chants rose in low, steady tones until the air quivered and the walls began to glow. Whether these were moments of divinity or illusions of heat, no one can say. But to imagine it, 100 torches extinguished, the chanting slowing, the stones themselves exhaling faint radiance, is to glimpse how faith once turned physics into prayer. And so this unfinished chamber becomes something more than architecture. It becomes a question. Why would those who could carve with such perfection leave a room incomplete, half luminous, half shadow? Perhaps because they wished to preserve the boundary between knowing and not knowing. To the ancient mind, light was not simply to see by, it was to remember by. To step fully into illumination was to end the mystery. Each block placed upon another became a note in a vast, unspoken symphony. So they stopped, deliberately, reverently, and let the darkness keep its half. Centuries later, the echoes of that reverence remain. Modern explorers bring their lamps and cameras, yet still find the air strangely heavy, as though carrying invisible residue. Some report the faint scent of burnt resin, though no torch has burned there in centuries. Others hear small tones when they speak, notes that do not belong to their voices. The chamber seems to return sound delayed, softened, like breath passing through distant water. One archaeologist, Jean-Philippe Lauer, who studied the Giza Plateau in the mid-20th century, once remarked that the pyramids were machines of eternity. He meant not engines but instruments designed to sustain ritual energy through space and time. In that light, an unfinished chamber might not be a flaw at all, but a safeguard, a vessel designed to store what could not be completed elsewhere. If you listen quietly, you might sense what they were protecting. To them, the pyramid was not merely a resting place for a king. It was an instrument, a monument tuned to the heartbeat of the planet itself. Not treasure, not power, but the unfinished moment itself. The interval between breath and word, between torch and shadow. A single suspended heartbeat that never resolved. Imagine standing there now, far beneath the desert's sleeping dunes. Your lamp flickers, then steadies. You raise it toward the walls, and the quartz grains answer, a faint constellation across stone. You can almost believe you are holding sunrise in your hands. The silence feels endless, yet soft, as though someone is still chiseling in another realm, still shaping the last corner of light. Perhaps the chamber was left unfinished because the builders understood something we no longer do, that some forms of light must remain incomplete to stay alive. To seal them perfectly would be to kill their movement, to stop the breath of the world. Inside, the air is ancient, and so they left it as it was, open to darkness, unfinished, eternal in its becoming. When you leave, the air behind you cools again. The faint shimmer fades. The desert above resumes its long, silver stillness. But as you walk back into the night, your eyes keep catching glints that aren't there. The memory of a glow that never fully ended. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it only reveals itself to those willing to linger in half-light, to those who understand that even in silence, the earth is still making something sacred, still drawing one slow, endless breath beneath the stone. Night was once the oldest book. Long before ink touched papyrus, before kings were carved in stone, the heavens themselves were the first scripture, and the sand below the patient reader. There are stories of a man who understood this better than any other. The scent of stone and copper lingers like memory. A solitary figure who climbed the plateau of Giza not with soldiers or slaves, but with silence and a reed pen. His name is forgotten, erased by the centuries like words rubbed from a tablet. Yet those who study the stars still speak of him. They call him simply the scribe. He lived during the reign of Khufu, or perhaps a little before, around 2550 BCE, when the air over the Nile shimmered with heat and devotion. In that age, the priests of Heliopolis charted the rising of Orion, the setting of Sirius, and the turning of the sun like the measure of a divine heartbeat. To them, the cosmos was not empty sky but architecture, a mirrored kingdom above the earth. Each star was a note in a sacred chord, and the pharaoh's task was to bring the world below into harmony with it. The scribe was said to have stood among them, listening to the sky rather than watching it. While others traced lines and angles, he heard tones soft, slow, vast, a hum that seemed to thread from star to stone. He began to write what he heard. The walls absorb every whisper, swallowing footsteps until only the pulse in one's ears remains. Not words, but patterns, spirals, dots, breaths between lines. His writing was not meant to be read aloud. It was meant to be felt. Each mark a pause in the language of the cosmos. In later centuries, fragments of his papyri would be found in the ruins of Saqqara, fragile slips of linen-bound reed paper coated in faint blue pigment. Egyptologists identified star charts drawn in ink made from copper oxide and honey resin, dated to the 4th dynasty. Yet one of the scrolls puzzled them most. It showed no constellations at all, only a series of repeating spirals and a single hieroglyph at the bottom, the sign for breath. Some dismissed it as an unfinished draft, but those who spent long nights beneath the desert sky began to wonder if it was something else. A transcription not of sight, but of sound. The music of the heavens captured as vibration, as rhythm, as the Earth's own response to the turning of stars. In the Grand Gallery, the space seems to hum faintly. Explorers have noted it for centuries. The plateau of Giza was already sacred in his time, long before the last stone of the Great Pyramid was set. At night, when the wind from the Nile stilled, the air trembled faintly, carrying voices, the distant murmur of priests chanting in the temples below. The scribe would sit among the unfinished stones, his lamp cupped in one hand, stylus in the other, sketching what the night told him. To him, each star was a word the gods spoke only once, and each pyramid that rose from the desert was a syllable in an ancient, ongoing sentence. One legend says he was the first to trace the exact alignment between the pyramids and Orion's belt. He noticed how the 3 brightest stars, Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka, matched the layout of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. It was not chance, he said, but memory. The stars were the ancestors of the stones, their reflection the key to immortality. By aligning them, humanity ensured the heavens would never forget their names. Even today, when sound engineers record in that passage, low frequencies ripple unexpectedly through the microphones. When later astronomers rediscovered this alignment, they thought it coincidence. But the priests of old spoke of something deeper, that the stars were not simply guides, but gateways. Their light, though ancient, carried messages still moving toward us, slower than thought but faster than prayer. And perhaps the scribe understood that. Perhaps he knew that one day, long after his ink had turned to dust, the same light he recorded would finally reach us, completing a sentence begun 5,000 years before. Among the ruins of the workers' village near Giza, fragments of limestone were found marked with faint grid lines and stars carved in red ochre. Some believed they were early drafts of astronomical maps. Others, dreamers perhaps, believed they were instructions, coordinates in stone, a language meant to awaken the earth itself. The scribe's name was never carved beside them. But every symbol bears the same small imperfection. A dot placed just slightly off the line, as if marking breath between stars. Some dismiss it as acoustics, but others wonder if the walls were shaped to sustain vibration. Not to carry voices outward, but to fold them inward into eternity. In the temples of Abydos, priests later taught that language was born from breath and silence together. Speech alone was incomplete. Only when silence followed could it become divine. The scribe, then, was not simply recording the sky, he was participating in it, weaving human breath into cosmic rhythm. He believed that to write was to echo creation, to make oneself a quiet companion to the gods. The Greeks who came centuries later would name this pursuit astronomia, the law of stars. But for him it was prayer. He did not measure, he listened. And what he heard was vast, mournful, and kind. One winter night, when the Nile rose high and the winds grew cold, the scribe disappeared. Some said he walked out into the desert following a trail of light, believing it would lead him to the first word ever spoken. Long before such theories, ancient priests of Heliopolis stood upon this plateau and studied the stars. Others said he simply lay down between the unfinished blocks of Khufu's tomb and let the sand cover him, merging with the rhythm he had served. When dawn came, his papyrus sheets were found scattered near the quarry, each marked with faint circles, drawn as if by a trembling hand. To the untrained eye they were meaningless. To the faithful they formed a map of eternity, the same pattern mirrored in the night sky above the pyramid's apex. Centuries later, when Napoleon's scholars entered Giza in 1799, they noted that sound behaved strangely inside the chambers. A whisper near the sarcophagus carried upward in spirals, returning seconds later like an answer. No one understood why. Some now suspect that the chamber's shape amplifies frequencies near 440 Hz, the same tone ancient flutes from Thebes were tuned to. Others recall the legend of the scribe and wonder if he had foreseen this, that even in stone, music endures. The desert has long forgotten his name, but not his rhythm. They mapped Orion's belt and mirrored it in the layout of the pyramids, 3 celestial fires laid upon the earth. Each night, when Orion rises and the wind passes over the plateau, a soft note hums between the stones. Sensitive instruments have detected micro-vibrations along the walls, a faint resonance only audible when all else is still. It may be the wind, or it may be the oldest recording in the world, the earth itself humming back the song the scribe once wrote in silence. If you were to stand there now between the shadows of the pyramids and look up toward the belt of Orion, you might feel what he felt, that the sky is not distant but near enough to touch. The air hums faintly, not from sound, but from awareness. The stars do not shine so much as breathe, and somewhere, between one heartbeat and the next, the same rhythm passes through you, the rhythm that once passed through him. Perhaps that was his message all along, that the stars are not watchers but listeners. In their temples they taught that stone could be awakened through ritual sound, chants in deep, sustained tones that made the air quiver like water, that they, too, remember, and that every breath we take beneath them is part of the same quiet conversation begun in the desert, when one lonely scribe lifted his eyes to the night and began to write what could never be read, only felt. The sand still moves around his resting place, erasing every footprint before morning. But the sky above remains exactly as he left it, unchanged, patient, waiting for another listener to look up and hear what he heard. Not words, not music, only the faintest pulse of eternity, written in light. Night gathers along the flanks of the plateau, and the great stones darken until their edges dissolve into sky. Lamps bloom here and there like small, patient stars, carried in careful hands. Work in Giza did not end with sunset. Some of its most delicate moments began only when the sun withdrew. Under the veil of darkness, when breath rose in white threads and the desert cooled to a hush, certain figures stepped forward. Not kings, not overseers, but quiet makers who preferred the company of shadow. They did not carve their names. They tuned the night. Copper tools slept during these hours. Dolerite hammers lay quiet beside the blocks. The tasks of weight and collision belonged to the day. Darkness was kept for measuring, for listening, for rites that required the sky. A cord stretched between two pegs became a line of destiny when aligned with a star. The old priest astronomers from Heliopolis brought their merkits, simple sighting rods, and the bay, a plumb line that trembled like a silver hair in the starlit air. They waited for the slow wheeling of the circumpolar lights, those deathless stars the Egyptians called the imperishables. And when the pair they watched crossed the thread of heaven at equal heights, the cord was drawn taut, and north was born in the sand. The corners of the pyramid received their first breath in that moment. The plan was laid without a word. These were the architects of shadow, not in titles but in devotion. They trusted darkness to reveal what noon would hide. In the quiet, the plateau became a great instrument. Sound carried differently when the heat sank into limestone and the wind exhaled. A tap of a reed against a block, a foot placed on a slab, the soft rasp of gypsum mortar. Each answer returned through the stone like a faint drum, telling where a seam was true, where a cavity needed filling, where a joint still held a breath of night between faces meant to kiss. Work gangs with names that read like prayers, the friends of Khufu, the drunkards of Menkor, left ochre marks on hidden blocks to guide the day crews. But the night crews left less. They touched the world and asked it to answer. By lamp glow, the casing stones from Tura shone like pale water. Their interiors were rough by necessity, their faces polished until they caught whatever light the moon could spare. Between them, the masons laid a thin bed of fine mortar, gypsum bright as bone dust, smoother than the touch of skin. Sir Flinders Petrie, who measured these joints long after the voices fell silent, found them so delicate that a single grain of sand could force the seam to widening. Such perfection hides in darkness. It was the lamp holders who watched for the faint crescent of shadow that betrayed a gap no fingertip could feel. A soft brush of natron-dried cloth, a breath to lift dust, a whisper between two men who had served the stone since youth, and the joint surrendered its imperfection to the night. Inside, where the corridors rose like the ribs of a great animal, night was law. The grand gallery, sloping upward with corbelled precision, kept and shaped sound. Even now a hum lingers there when a voice tests the air. Long before instruments called microphones learned its secrets, hands and ears did. A builder would place his palm upon the wall and sing a note barely born, a tone that would never dare a daytime sun. The stone replied, "It is not romance to say so. Generations of visitors have felt it, and accounts as far apart as the scholars of Napoleon's survey and modern acousticians describe the same shy resonance that blooms and fades like breath in a sleeping chest. If day was for moving the body of the pyramid, night refined its voice." Perhaps this was why the builders carved with rhythm, each strike of their copper tools carrying the cadence of prayer. Beyond the public names of chambers, the kings, the queens, there were other rooms more private to the work. Niches where oil lamps gathered in baskets, their wicks made of twisted linen. Alcoves where jars of black resin waited to be warmed. Marks drawn in red ochre, the first intention, and corrected in carbon black, the priestly approval, as artists in tombs at Saqqara would later do on walls of plaster. The same canon of proportion traced with chords and squared grids appeared in measuring the pyramid's inner geometry. Even the act of drawing a line had ritual to it. The scribe dipped his reed in pigment ground with gum and desert water, lifted it to drip a single shining bead back into the bowl, then breathed once, a small vow before the first stroke. How did the blocks climb? Men argue still, steep ramps, spirals of packed earth hugging the body, switchbacks that cradled the courses like arms. Every theory leaves a different footprint in the sand, yet all agree on a small, stubborn grace. Sledges creaked over dampened tracks while teams leaned in rhythm, and where the rope bit their hands they sang to sew the pain together. A painting from far to the south, in the tomb of Jehudi Hotep at El Bersha, shows a colossus dragged on a wooden sledge while a man at the prow pours water to quiet the sand. And in that ancient stroke of liquid, scholars hear the earliest science of friction tamed by ritual's gentle hand. Wet grains hold each other like friends in the night. The sledge slides. The song continues. Shadow kept its own ledgers. Not the tall hieroglyphs of kings, but the pencil-thin notes workers scrawled for themselves. Delivery counts on lean scraps of limestone, nicknames on coarse stones that know I would see again, small jackal sketches to ask protection from what waits in gaps and corners. In 1837, when Howard Weiss blew his way into the relieving spaces above the king's chamber, he found red marks on those hidden blocks. Quarry crew names, tally signs, the cartouche of Knum Khufu traced in a hand that had likely sweated in the quarries at Gebel El Ahmar. Scholars argued, some still do, but to stand in a chamber no royal procession ever entered and find the breath of a worker lying there like a pressed flower is to feel the night creak backward on its hinges. The makers had signed the inside of the heart. Such signatures belonged to shadow. Others came with greater gentleness. Auguste Mariette moved with the patience of a man who believed dust deserved respect. He founded the museum at Bulak to keep Egypt's memory near its river. Jean-Philippe Lauer, devoted guardian of Saqqara, wrote that pyramids were machines of eternity, and you can hear in that phrase a modest echo of the older truth the night crews knew. The monument is not only mass, but function. An arrangement that receives the sky, feeds on breath and chant, and returns something transformed. In our century, instruments peered through stone and found a void high in Khufu's pyramid, a secret length in the body like a swallow of night caught and kept. The Scan Pyramids team called it the Big Void, a discovery made not by torches but by particles born of stars, muons whispering through matter. Even knowledge now arrives by way of celestial shadow. If the day belonged to geometry, the night belonged to correction. A tiny chip at a corner could cast a long scar at noon. At night that scar appeared first, a bruise of darkness sliding where light once pooled. The lamp men learned to read it like script. A pinch of gypsum, the weight of a hand, the turning of a block by the width of a fingernail. These are night movements, too small to boast of, too large to forget. Later, when casing stones were stolen to build Cairo's mosques and palaces after the great earthquakes loosened them, the pyramid's naked core learned another shade of dark. Even stripped, the lines hold. A shadow reads what the eye refuses. Beyond the plateau, in the worker city at Height El Ghurab, archaeologists found bakeries the size of chapels and breweries that smoked dawn into the air. Bread and beer were made like offerings, thousands of loaves shaped in molds to feed the labor that fed the monument. Graves nearby held bodies that had worked to the bone and yet were buried with care. Pottery jars, amulets. A cow's shoulder blade laid like a quiet hand over the ribs. The people of the night had homes, laughter, small complaints about sore backs, stories told low so children would sleep. And then the lamps were lifted, and they returned to the stone to keep their appointments with shadow. Not all decisions were left to overseers. There is a stance the hands learn. Fingertips splayed, head bent slightly as if to listen through the palm. In that fold of darkness, a worker becomes an instrument. He hears the gone-in heartbeat of a hollow behind a face. He smells the floral edge of heated resin ready to seal a hairline seam. He sees the shallow fur of dust that gathers where two surfaces refuse marriage. These perceptions do not survive into the languages of later centuries. But sometimes they are preserved in gesture, the way a figure on a tomb wall holds a chisel not by its middle but near the haft, the way a helper steadies the cord with 2 fingers, not 3. The hidden knowledge of bodies earned after sunset. It has no name beyond breath. There were rites everyone understood. When a course closed, when the last stone of a layer slid home, the crew set down their tools and stood very still. Someone poured beer onto the block and watched the foam trace a pale curve. If it pooled, the joint held pride. If it ran, the joint held patience. Either way, the night kept the secret. The foreman spoke a few words to the distant dead, who were not yet dead but would be before the pyramid woke to its final shape. Then the lamps went out and the plateau grew vast again. Those small lights carried back to the village like bits of the Milky Way falling into human hands. Scholars will go on arguing the mathematics, where the base began, how the slope was defined, whether a spiral ramp hugged the sides or a straight ascent rode the back of the earth like a river only stone could see. But in that soft field where proof and prayer overlap, the architects of shadow move unhindered. They set plumb lines to stars not to measure superiority but to borrow steadiness. They polished stone until it remembered moonlight. They tuned chambers until a whisper could climb its own echo. They wrote in ochre and erased in black until the line acquired its soul. And when a joint would not accept its partner, They waited and listened until the darkness taught them. If you walk the plateau now in the hour before dawn, when the breath of the desert lies close to the skin, you may catch them at the edge of sight. Not ghosts, but a way of working that survives any body. The rope's faint creak speaks. The cord's shadow grows straight. A star holds still just long enough. You place your hand on the stone, and the cold answers with a warmth that is not heat but attention. For a moment you see how the night itself was a tool, and how those who knew it left their art sealed in the seams. It was said that the overseers timed the chisels to match the heartbeats of those who labored, so that all of Giza pulsed as one body. Morning will come, as it always did, with the bull team straining and the songs stitched tight to keep heart with muscle. Daylight will wear its crown, and plans will strut across the sand. But the pyramid's truest work remains nocturnal. What day raises, night aligns. What day hammers, night heals. And the monument that teaches us about the sun owes its calm to those who labored beneath the stars. Quiet figures against a vast, silvered wall, bending not to the king but to the grain of the world, making of darkness a measuring stick, and of shadow a sacred craft. Perhaps this is why the structure endures beyond our explanations. It was made by men who trusted what cannot be seen to correct what can. When the last lamp was snuffed and the last heel turned toward the village, the pyramid did not sleep. It held the night inside itself the way a shell holds ocean. You can hear that sea when you close your eyes, a low, even breath moving through galleries, through joints thinner than a fingernail, through mortar bright as milk, through every place a patient hand once asked the stone to answer. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Theirs are among them, waiting where the light grows gentle and the stars lean down to help. The wind softens as it crosses the western valley, carrying the scent of limestone and tamarisk. The sun has fallen, leaving the desert brushed in violet and ash. Beyond the shadow of Giza's great monuments, where the sand drifts in patient spirals, lies a smaller tomb, plain, silent, and untouched. The villagers call it El Baraya El Sagira, the Little Queen's tomb. It sits half-buried at the edge of the plateau, where the voices of the guides fade and the desert begins to dream again. No inscription marks her name. No statue guards her entrance. Only a doorway carved in modest proportions, half-sealed by sand and time. When archaeologists first found it, in the early years of the 20th century, during the quieter excavations beyond Khufu's pyramid, they expected another minor queen's chamber, one of many satellite tombs built for wives, daughters, and priestesses. But when they entered, they found nothing. Not the emptiness of looting, but of intent. There are inscriptions in nearby tombs that speak of Heka, not magic as we understand it, but harmony. The ability to align with the divine pattern of the world. The walls were smooth, unpainted, the limestone pale as pressed linen. No sarcophagus, no inscriptions, no jars of offering. Only a faint scent of resin clinging to the air, like a memory that refused to fade. Some believed the burial had never taken place, that construction was abandoned before completion. But those who lingered longer noticed something else. A strange precision in the emptiness, a stillness too deliberate to be neglected. It felt as if the room had been finished in silence, not left undone, but sealed before the idea of filling it could even begin. The archaeologist Salim Hassan wrote of it in 1933. He called it a void of deliberate order, a chamber that seemed consecrated not to memory, but to forgetting. He noted that the air inside the tomb was cooler than any other nearby, though no vent or shaft connected it to the surface. Some nights, when the desert was utterly still, the air seemed to stir, as if the tomb inhaled faintly, then fell silent again. The story of the nameless queen grew from that breath. To build with Heka was to breathe in tune with creation itself. No one knew her lineage, no cartouche, no offering stela. But fragments of fine linen found in a nearby pit suggested a woman of high station. The weave was royal, threaded with gold filaments. Some said she was Khufu's daughter, others a priestess who served Hathor, the goddess of silence and rebirth. Whatever her name, it is lost, but her absence remains immaculate. In Egyptian belief, to erase a name was to kill twice, once in flesh and once in memory. Yet this tomb feels untouched by malice. Her silence seems chosen, as if she sought to slip beyond remembrance, to rest where no invocation could disturb her. The people of her time believed that the soul, the Ba, could travel between worlds, but only if the name was spoken. Perhaps she wanted the opposite. The stonemasons, though nameless now, believed they were part of that rhythm, breathing, carving, chanting, until limestone ceased to be mere rock and became memory incarnate. Perhaps she believed that by sealing her name, she could dissolve entirely, merging with the desert wind, escaping even the gods' attention. There are precedents for such retreat. In the pyramid texts of Unas, the oldest known religious inscriptions in the world, carved centuries after Khufu, there are verses that speak of those who do not ascend among the stars but fall silent among the sand. They were the chosen forgotten, the ones who believed that eternity began where the voice ended. The tomb's interior supports this thought. Its proportions are flawless, a cube of quiet geometry, its walls forming a perfect harmony of measure. Architecturally, it mirrors the dimensions of the Queen's Chamber inside Khufu's pyramid, though simpler, humbler, stripped of adornment. Some scholars suspect it was designed by the same architects who worked under Himyunu, Khufu's vizier and master builder. Others believe it was carved later, during the reign of Khafre, when devotion gave way to reflection. One curious feature remains. In the centuries that followed, others came searching for what they left behind. At the room's center lies a shallow recess, not a pit, not a sarcophagus bed, but a hollow shaped like the outline of a body. No markings, no inscriptions, only the faint smoothness of stone worn by repeated touch. Someone, long ago, had traced that form over and over, as though preparing the earth to hold a dream. And then nothing. No burial, no ritual, no final words. The entrance was sealed, and the desert began its long, patient work. When modern explorers opened it again, they found a layer of fine sand covering the floor, rippled in patterns that resembled the movement of water. No draft entered, yet the sand had shifted, perhaps by tremor, perhaps by the faint breath of the earth itself. Under lamplight, it looked almost alive, as if something invisible passed through, too gentle to disturb but too constant to ignore. In 1837, Colonel Howard Weiss and his team lowered themselves through narrow shafts, their candles trembling in the stale air. The silence was not empty. It was shaped, intentional, resonant, like a chord that had been struck and left to fade forever. Some visitors report that sound behaves strangely there. Whispers die almost instantly, swallowed before they reach the far wall. When someone speaks, even softly, the voice returns blurred, delayed, as if sliding through layers of unseen air. Acousticians studying the tomb in 2012 confirmed it. The limestone absorbs higher frequencies, leaving only the lowest vibrations, a hum too deep for hearing. To stand there is to feel your own words fall inward, folding back into your chest. The Egyptians believed that the heart, not the brain, was the seat of memory. When they spoke of silence, they meant not absence of sound but the stilling of thought. To be silent was to be eternal. When they struck certain walls, faint echoes answered, slow, cavernous, as if the pyramid were sighing. Perhaps this was her secret, a tomb not for the body, but for the noise of the world. Among the ruins near the site, a single fragment of alabaster was found, the rim of a canopic jar, engraved with one word, Hetep. It means peace, offering, completion. A fitting epitaph for someone who chose the quiet path. Not immortality, not worship, only peace. In older texts, silence is described as a gate. To cross it is to step into the true form of existence, where all names are dissolved and only essence remains. When the priests performed funerary rites, they always ended with the extinguishing of a lamp, a symbolic death of light, a surrender to the invisible. Perhaps her tomb was that final extinguishing. A single lamp blown out beneath the earth, leaving behind a darkness so perfect it became divine. If you stand near her resting place at night, when the dunes cast long shadows and the stars tremble low above the horizon, the air feels strangely soft. Weiss wrote of chambers that speak. though he could not say to whom they spoke. The wind falls quiet, as if respecting her vow. Even the hum of insects fades at the threshold. It is as though the desert itself keeps her secret, guarding the silence she once loved. No one prays there. No guide leads tourists to its entrance. It remains untouched, suspended between ruin and dream. And yet, in that stillness, she lives not as a queen, but as a breath that forgot how to end. Perhaps she understood something no inscription could hold. That eternity is not in remembrance, but in release. That to become part of the desert sigh is the truest form of immortality. Later, the French archaeologist Auguste Mariette described an even stranger stillness. When the moon rises over Giza and lays its silver light upon the stones, it brushes her tomb gently, as if greeting an equal. The sand shifts once softly, like a slow inhale, and for a fleeting moment, the air seems to whisper, not in words but in presence, that some souls do not sleep beneath stone. They sleep within the silence that built it. Night gathers like ink along the edges of the plateau, and the desert, ancient, patient, and endless, begins to hum its low, familiar note. Every dune breathes in slow rhythm, a tide of sand that remembers when it was sea. For beneath this quiet ocean of dust and bone, explorers have long whispered of another current, invisible, steady, alive. They call it the river beneath the desert. The story begins not in myth but in wonder. In the journals of those who dug too deep, who followed the faint scent of moisture in places no rain had touched for 1,000 years. He wrote that within certain rooms the air held a density beyond silence, as though sound itself had been buried alive. Howard Weiss noted it first, briefly, in his writings from 1837, the strange coolness that rose from the lower shafts of the Great Pyramid. He called it a breath of damp air from within the stone. Others dismissed it, yet later explorers spoke the same. A stillness that felt wet, an echo that carried as though over water. And so the legend took root, that beneath Giza's sleeping earth, an underground river once moved, hidden in the dark like a secret vein of the world. The idea is not so far from truth. The Nile has always wandered. In the age of Khufu, its course flowed closer to the pyramids than it does now, a sacred artery that carried stones, food, and prayers. Boats from Aswan came drifting on its surface, bearing the pale Tura limestone used to clothe the Great Pyramid in light. When the river shifted over centuries, it left behind channels deep in the bedrock, traces of its old body, preserved like fossils in the desert's throat. Geologists have since found evidence. Sediment lines buried under Giza, flecks of shell, and layers of clay no wind could have placed. Modern instruments have revealed voids within the Great Pyramid, great spaces untouched by hands since the reign of Khufu. Science calls it the Aramat Branch, the Pyramid River, a ghost course that once ran beneath the Western Plateau, feeding the builders and the gods alike. But to the ancients, it was never geology. It was divinity. They called it the Hidden Nile, the mirror of the one above. While the visible river carried the living, this invisible one carried the souls of kings. When a pharaoh died, his spirit was said to board the solar bark, the boat of Ra, and journey through the underworld, sailing beneath the sands from west to east before rising again with the dawn. Every pyramid on the Giza Plateau was aligned toward that celestial passage. Its corridors were the channels of that unseen river, its chambers, the harbors of rebirth. The builders carved their shafts not just for air or light, but as conduits, ways for the breath of the world to move through stone, as the Nile once moved through earth. Even today, when you stand within the lower chamber of Khufu's pyramid, the air is thick and cool, heavy with something that does not belong to dryness. No one knows their shape, their purpose, or their voice. Touch the walls and moisture beads faintly on your fingers. Not water, but condensation born of breath and temperature, the earth exhaling in slow rhythm. Some archaeologists explain it as humidity trapped since antiquity. Others leave it unnamed. In 1924, when the Egyptian engineer Salim Hassan explored the tunnels under the plateau, his men found narrow shafts descending beyond known chambers, blocked by fallen rock. When they cleared one, a rush of cold air escaped, the kind that tastes of stone and age. They swore they heard a faint trickling sound, distant, impossible. They lowered a torch. The flame curved sideways, as if drawn by a current. But no water was ever found. Only silence, deep and trembling. Perhaps that was the river's truest form. Not water, but vibration. Some scientists believe they were architectural necessities, others that they were ritual resonators, places where vibration was meant to sleep. A current of sound that flows through the limestone heart of Giza. Every chamber, every passage, every joint was tuned to its resonance, designed to carry a tone below the threshold of hearing. When priests chanted their invocations, that tone awakened. It passed through the stone like a pulse, humming beneath their feet, merging with the rhythm of their breathing. A hidden river of frequency, invisible, eternal, unbroken. Modern studies have confirmed what the ancients seemed to sense. Limestone, when cut in precise proportion, amplifies certain frequencies, especially those near 110 Hz, the same tone used in temple chants to induce calm and reverence. Sound engineers who tested the king's chamber found standing waves that rise and fall like invisible tides. Every vibration passes through the granite, through the limestone, into the earth below, a harmonic that moves like water through the unseen veins of the desert. Maybe that is what they were building all along. And still, beneath all this speculation, the same whisper persists, the sense that the pyramid breathes. Not a tomb, not a monument, but a vessel for a river made of breath. The Egyptians believed the soul was carried through the underworld by memory, the remembrance of the right names, the right prayers, the right rhythms. Perhaps this underground current was that remembrance itself, the earth's memory of the river that once nourished it. A way for the dead to return home, carried not by boats of wood, but by echoes carved in stone. Beneath the plateau, geophysical scans today still reveal voids, long, slender spaces where density shifts and stone thins. They are marked in the diagrams like wounds in the rock, their purpose still unknown. When the scientists lower sensors, they register faint vibrations that come and go in cycles, rising every few hours as if something far below still breathes. No one can explain it. The desert has no heart, they say, and yet the numbers whisper otherwise. Somewhere under those layers of sand and limestone, water still moves. Not a river, perhaps, but a trace, a memory, a slow migration of ancient rain trapped in porous rock. Stand within its passageways and listen. Its journey is measured not in centuries, but in heartbeats of the earth. Every few decades, a droplet freed by gravity drifts downward, then sideways, joining others in silence. They never reach the surface, never meet the sky, yet they flow softly, unseen. Those who sleep near the pyramid speak of dreams filled with sound. The slow lap of water against stone, the rhythm of oars, voices murmuring in a tongue without words. Guides in the nearby village of Nazlet El Salmon still tell travelers not to dig too deep at night. They say that under certain moons, the ground itself whispers, a sound like wind over glass, but steady, almost melodic. The locals call it the breath of the Nile that never died. Perhaps the ancients knew. Perhaps when they built their chambers and corridors, they were mapping that current, sealing its song into the pyramid's geometry. Each passage a note, each chamber a pause, each stone another drop in the river of silence. The air seems to shift with your heartbeat. And if you listen now, truly listen, you might still hear it. Not with your ears, but with something deeper, the part of you that hums when the world is quiet enough. A faint resonance beneath your heartbeat, a vibration that seems to belong not to you but to the ground itself. It flows upward, through the soles of your feet, through bone and breath, until for one brief moment, you cannot tell where you end and the earth begins. The wind shifts, and the dunes sigh. The stars shimmer like fragments of a sunken current. And far below, beneath the sleeping desert, the hidden river moves on, slow as eternity, sure as dawn. Perhaps that is what they meant when they built their pyramids beside the Nile, that water and silence are the same. Both remember, both return, both carve their way through time. One flows above, carrying life. Every inhale meets stone. Every exhale returns altered, softer, older. The other flows below, carrying memory. And between them stands the stone, listening forever, as the breath of the world passes through it. The last river, still moving beneath the sand. Beneath the last light of dusk, the Great Pyramid glows faintly. Not golden, but gray-blue, like the skin of an old god at rest. The desert exhales, long and low, and the air grows still around its edges. Within its body of stone, chambers shift from light to darkness, from knowing to silence. And somewhere above the king's chamber, in a place meant never to be entered, there lies a mark that has kept historians awake for nearly 2 centuries. A name written in red ochre, both proof and doubt, both record and question. The cartouche of Khufu. When Colonel Howard Weiss first crawled into those upper voids in 1837, he carried with him the arrogance of empire and the impatience of time. Dynamite did what chisels could not. Walls shook. Dust rose like breath from a sleeping body, and when it cleared, his candlelight trembled across a beam of stone. There, scratched roughly in red paint, was the cartouche of Khufu, the pharaoh whom history names as the pyramid's builder. It was a discovery that crowned a career. Weiss announced it to the world with pride. The mystery, he said, was solved. The Great Pyramid belonged to Khufu, son of Sneferu, ruler of the 4th dynasty. The stone spoke, and the scholars nodded. But time has a way of unsealing doubt. Later eyes noticed things his haste had missed. The paint lay upon the seams of the blocks, not beneath them, meaning the inscription came after the stones were set. The hieroglyphs themselves, though familiar, carried small errors, subtle curves more at home in later hands. And in Weiss' own journals, whole pages were missing. Some accused him of forgery, a desperate man seeking fame in the dust of legends. Others defended him, arguing that quarry marks were made after setting, that errors proved haste, not deceit. Yet the whisper remains, echoing down every dark shaft of the pyramid's history. Did the cartouche tell the truth, or was it painted to create one? Even now, scholars stand divided. Some point to the other names daubed nearby, crews of workers who called themselves the Friends of Khufu and the White Crown of Khnum Khufu. Their red marks, they say, prove authenticity. Others note that no ancient inscription elsewhere uses the exact spelling Weiss found. The symbols seem slightly wrong, as though drawn from memory rather than tradition. It is as though the pyramid remembers you, not as a person, but as sound, another brief vibration joining the symphony it has been gathering since the first block was set. But perhaps the greater mystery is not whether the name was genuine, but why it mattered so deeply. For long before Weiss' discovery, Egypt had no need of proof. The pyramid itself was evidence enough. A mountain of faith, precision, and breadth. Its builders cared less for names than for balance, less for inscription than for alignment. The monument's geometry was its scripture, written in shadow and sunlight rather than ink. And yet we, centuries later, long for ownership. We crave authorship. We need to know who. So we search for a name to anchor our wonder. But names in Egypt were living things. They could be born, buried, erased, reborn. When a ruler's cartouche was destroyed, his soul withered. When painted anew, he lived again. And sometimes a name could be borrowed, a cloak of legitimacy worn by those who came after. In the Valley Temple of Khafre, where the limestone walls still gleam faintly under torchlight, archaeologists found an older block reused in later construction. Its underside bore another name, half sanded away. Reinscription was a ritual act, the reweaving of time. So even if the cartouche above the king's chamber was painted by later hands, it may not have been deceit. It may have been devotion, a restoration of memory, a desperate attempt to keep Khufu's spirit bound to his creation, after centuries of silence threatened to unname him. In that sense, the lie, if it was one, became a form of prayer. The Egyptians believed that truth, Mat, was not a fixed fact but a living balance. One could preserve order by shaping illusion carefully enough. A falsehood in service of harmony was closer to holiness than a truth that fractured the world. Perhaps the red paint on those stones was such an act. Not fraud, but faith. There is an old belief among the Copts that stones record prayer. Still, the air around it feels heavy. Those who've entered the upper chamber speak of a strange tension there, the sense of having stepped into a thought too large for language. The ceilings press low, the granite beams rest with impossible precision, and the silence hums with weight. It is not the stillness of death, but of concentration, as if the stones themselves are listening for confession. When modern scientists scanned those chambers with cosmic rays, the muons revealed another space above, vast, empty, untouched. They called it the Big Void. Some believe it to be structural, others ceremonial. Whatever its purpose, it remains sealed, its walls unmarked, a silence above a silence. Perhaps that void holds the real truth, the one no name could capture. The workers who painted that red mark might have known. Standing on rough wooden scaffolds by torchlight, they dipped brushes of palm fiber into ochre ground with Nile water. The pigment was ancient even then, iron oxide from the cliffs near Aswan, a dust the color of dried blood. They painted their crew names in quick, unpracticed strokes, laughter and fatigue in every line, and among them someone, a foreman perhaps or a priest overseeing the final blessing, drew the royal oval and sealed it with the sign of life. It might have been reverence, it might have been routine, or it might have been a message, left for the far future, knowing we would come seeking answers. So it worked. We have been arguing with that mark for 200 years. The desert, however, remains unimpressed. They say that walls which have heard enough devotion begin to sing invisibly, their resonance carried in the dust. Every evening, the light slides along the pyramid's face, catching each stone for a heartbeat before moving on. The names we cling to fade under that gaze. Khufu, Weiss, the scholars and skeptics all become dust. What remains is the shape itself, the way it meets the sky, the way it keeps its silence. There is an ancient Egyptian word, sesheshet, meaning both inscription and breath. To write was to exhale something of the soul. Perhaps that is the truest way to read the cartouche, not as label or lie, but as a breath left in stone. A reminder that even in the pursuit of immortality, every truth eventually becomes a whisper. Stand beneath the pyramid at night, and the air still hums faintly, as though the stone remembers its own name. Whether it is Khufu's or someone else's or none at all, matters less than the breath that carries it. Perhaps every cartouche lies a little. Perhaps that is how names survive, by bending toward whatever silence will hold them. And so the red mark endures, floating in the dark above the king's empty chamber. A name painted across time, still warm in the memory of the stone, still waiting for belief to finish its sentence. In the end, the pyramid keeps its secret. It was never built for certainty. It was built for the echo, the faint murmur of a name, real or imagined, that rises like smoke through granite halls and disappears into the night. Perhaps that is what lies beneath the Great Pyramid. Not gold, not bodies, but a sleeping hymn, the first sound humanity ever made in unison. Night bends low over the plateau, and the stars lean close enough to touch the crown of the Great Pyramid. The sand cools underfoot, its warmth drawn upward into the silent body of stone. Within, deep beyond the passageways of air and the resting chambers of kings, lies a block unlike the rest. A slab of black basalt that hums faintly when struck, a tone so low it seems to travel through the bones rather than the ears. The workers who placed it centuries ago gave it no inscription, no crown, no ornament. Yet it endures as one of Giza's oldest mysteries, the stone that remembered the sky. Basalt does not belong here. The quarries of Giza yield limestone, pale, porous, born of seabeds. Basalt comes from elsewhere, from the cooled hearts of volcanoes near Fayum, far to the south, where molten rock once met ancient riverbeds. To bring such stone north, across desert and water, was no small act. Each block was loaded on barges, carried by the Nile during its flood, and dragged up ramps slicked with mud and prayers. Why bear so dark a stone into a monument of light? Some archaeologists suggest it was chosen for strength, that the floor of Khufu's temple, or perhaps the sarcophagus chamber itself, demanded hardness. Yet even they pause at its placement. In one chamber, amid walls of pink granite, The basalt lies alone, darker than night, smooth as if worn by invisible hands. No one knows when it was set there or by whom. The Egyptians called basalt Bien-Pet, soul of heaven. They believed it had fallen from the sky in an age when gods walked among them. Fragments of meteoritic iron were worked into daggers and crowns, their strange gleam mistaken for captured starlight. Perhaps the stone too carried that memory. Not celestial iron, but the color and density of night itself, a reminder that heaven and earth once touched. The priests of Heliopolis taught that every material held a breath of its origin. Gold was the flesh of the sun, silver, the bones of the moon, and basalt, the cooled breath of the sky. To walk upon it was to tread on eternity solidified. In the temple courtyards, they paved processional ways with it, dark mirrors polished until they drank the sunlight whole, returning none. The high priests believed that the dead could walk across those pavements without casting a shadow, slipping between worlds unseen. Centuries later, when travelers from the north first saw the basalt causeway that stretched from Khufu's pyramid toward the Valley Temple, they called it the Black Road. Even broken by time, it held a strange sheen, as though light slid beneath its surface instead of upon it. Some pieces now lie in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Under electric light they look dull, but touch them, and warmth stirs from within, faint but real, as if remembering the sun that shaped them. In 1954, when Kamal el-Malik uncovered the great funerary boat beside the pyramid, the cedar vessel sealed in its limestone pit for 45 centuries, he noted fragments of black stone placed beneath its prow. Basalt again, not structural but symbolic, the boat resting on a piece of sky turned to earth, a bridge for the king's soul to launch upon the celestial river. Ancient texts from the Pyramid Age speak of the stars that do not die, those circumpolar lights that circle the northern sky without setting. The kings wished to join them. To build a monument that could hold the vibration of those stars was to secure immortality. Perhaps the basalt was chosen for that purpose, a stone dense enough to echo their endless turning. When struck, it produces a note near the pitch of a human heartbeat. To the ears of the priests, that sound was not noise but memory, the pulse of the heavens caught and kept. Imagine a night 5,000 years ago, torches guttering, drums distant from the workers' camp. Within the finished chamber, a priest kneels beside the basalt floor. He places his palm flat upon its surface and feels the faint quiver of cooling stone. He begins to hum, low, steady. The sound gathers in the walls, folds back upon itself, finds the same frequency as the earth's deep breath. The others join him, a chord built from voices and patience. The air thickens, almost visible, vibrating like water struck by light. For a moment, the stars seem to lean closer. Then the chant ends. The chamber falls silent, but something lingers, an aftertone buried in matter. That resonance has not stopped. Modern acousticians testing the sarcophagus chamber have recorded frequencies between 30 and 60 hertz, tones that humans feel more than hear. The granite and basalt amplify them, creating waves that rise and fall like tides. Whether by design or accident, the space hums in harmony with the planet's own resonant frequency. A scientist would call it coincidence. A priest would call it proof. A breath so long that it outlived empires. Over the centuries, the basalt blocks have darkened further, their polish dulled by dust, their edges softened by time. Yet when a beam of morning sunlight finds them, they answer with a dull blue gleam, not reflection, but remembrance. Travelers who see it often pause without knowing why. The effect lasts only seconds, vanishing as the angle changes. Some think it trick of the eye, others the stone's secret. But the locals have a saying, the sky still visits what once belonged to it. There are fragments of basalt scattered throughout Egypt now, in temples and quarries and forgotten storerooms. Each carries the same weight, the same silence. At Saqqara, one block still bears the faint imprint of a worker's palm, pressed into soft resin thousands of years ago before cooling turned it permanent. When light strikes that mark, it seems to deepen, as if the hand were still reaching upward from within. Even Napoleon's scholars, who came with rulers and compasses to measure the geometry of eternity, grew quiet before those black stones. Vivant Denon wrote in his notes, "It seems to drink the day, leaving only the idea of light." Basalt has another property, rarely spoken of. When struck sharply, it can produce small sparks, brief flashes, like stars waking and dying. The ancient artisans who cut it must have seen this in the quarries at Fayum. Hammer meets stone, and a constellation blooms for an instant. They called it the laughter of the sky. Perhaps that laughter was the first secret of the material. That creation, even when violent, leaves beauty in its wake. To walk among those stones now is to walk through a music long ended yet still echoing. The air feels dense, as if saturated with unfinished prayer. The sand at their base carries a faint magnetic pull, the same invisible line that once drew the compass of the priests' minds toward the North Star. And though no one chants there anymore, the vibration persists, inaudible yet present, a rhythm older than the names we give it. At dusk, when the horizon burns to copper and the first stars appear, the basalt seems to breathe. Shadows pool on its surface like ink poured into water. You could almost imagine the reflection of Orion trembling there, the hunter leaning eternally toward his own mirrored belt of pyramids. Perhaps that is why the builders placed the dark stone amid the pale, to remind those who entered that light and shadow are halves of the same sky, to remember the night even within the house of the sun. If you rest your hand upon it now, the surface is cool, yet a pulse answers from deep within. It is the memory of heat, of descent from molten birth to silence. You may feel it as vibration, as weight, as something between. In that touch, you hold a fragment of the world before it hardened, when sky and earth were still exchanging breath. The desert around you is silent. The pyramid stands immovable, and in that hush, a single truth flickers. The sky never left. It only changed its shape, choosing to live inside stone. So the basalt endures, dark, unyielding, patient, a fallen piece of night that refuses to forget its stars. And maybe that is why, even now, no one can agree on what truly rests within. And perhaps when the wind moves through the plateau at midnight, that faint humming you hear is not mere air over stone. It is the sound of the heavens remembering themselves, the last echo of creation, still resonating in the chamber where a piece of the sky came to rest. The desert does not glitter in daylight the way stories suggest. Its gold lies deeper, hidden in dust, in silence, in memory. When the sun falls low and the horizon turns the color of embered honey, the sand seems to stir, and for a few brief moments the entire plateau glows from within, as though remembering what it once carried. Egypt dreamed in gold. Not the gold of merchants or conquerors, but the gold of divinity. Sunlight made solid, eternity shaped by hand. Every grain of metal pulled from the riverbanks or sifted from Nubian veins was believed to be the flesh of the gods. It did not rust, did not die, and therefore belonged to heaven. Long before the first pyramid rose, miners journeyed beyond the Nile into the eastern desert, toward Wadi Hammamat, where mountains blush in ochre and the rocks themselves bleed with veins of gold. Their camps were small sanctuaries in wilderness. Tomb, temple, observatory, or something far older, a memory of sound, of unity, of intention. The oldest hieroglyphs carved their speak not of greed, but gratitude. Offerings to Min, to Hathor, to the spirits of the quarry. Even in the heat that burned the eyes and split the lips, the workers prayed before striking the rock. They did not take. They awakened. When the sun struck their chisels, tiny sparks flew, like pieces of dawn returning home. They said the mountainside when gold was found, as though relieved of a burden. And when they smelted it, in clay furnaces buried to their necks in sand, the air shimmered like liquid fire, the desert itself exhaling light. From those flames came the metal that would sheath the capstones of pyramids, the benbenet, the first point of sunrise. Imagine it. Dawn breaking across the plateau, and the pyramid's apex catching the first breath of the sun, flashing like a mirror to the heavens. No wonder they called these monuments the horizons of kings. Each one was a sunrise preserved in stone, each capstone a spark returned to the sky, Each theory rises and falls like the desert wind, leaving the silence unchanged. The gold was not merely adornment. It was language. Every temple wall spoke with it. Every idol glowed because of it. It bridged the living and the divine, allowing the invisible to take form. To gild a god's face was to feed it light, to ensure that the sun itself recognized its reflection when it rose again. Even in burial, gold served the same purpose. When Tutankhamun's tomb was opened thousands of years later, the world saw what the priests of Giza already knew, that gold was not wealth but prayer. The boy king lay encased in it, the skin of eternity pressed against human form. His mask was hammered so thin it still bore the warmth of breath, the softness of flesh imagined beyond death. The inscriptions whispered the same refrain: "You will shine as Ra shines, forever." The builders are gone, their names swallowed by time, but the breath they captured still lingers, a low vibration between worlds, patient and unending. Yet beneath such glory lingered melancholy, for even gold could not stop decay, only delay it. Every empire that dreamed of immortality eventually learned this truth. The gold that lined their temples outlived them, but it too faded, stolen, melted, reshaped. The light they worshipped became currency, their sun reduced to trade, and the desert, patient as always, swallowed what remained. Archaeologists in the 20th century rediscovered the mines at Wadi el-Fawakir and Fawakir, the mother of mines. They found furnaces blackened by centuries of labor, grinding stones still marked by calloused hands. Fragments of clay crucibles glimmered faintly when turned in the light, as if the metal they once held refused to die completely. Each fragment a syllable in an unspoken hymn. If you were to stand there now, beneath the desert stars, and place your hand upon the stone, you might feel it. A faint pulse, neither heat nor movement, just presence. The workers who tended those fires were not slaves, but initiates in a ritual older than kingdoms. They believed they were coaxing the soul of the sun to sleep in earthly form. When the molten gold cooled, they poured libations of milk and honey into the molds, offerings to soothe what had fallen from heaven. And then they whispered its secret name, the one no historian has ever found. That name was not for power, but for remembrance. To handle gold was dangerous. It could consume the spirit if treated as mere matter. The priests said that those who looked upon it too greedily risked blindness of the soul. Their eyes filled with light but emptied of meaning. So they worked behind veils in the half-dark, polishing until their own reflections blurred. They said the less you saw of yourself in it, the purer it became. It travels through the fingertips, through the bones, up into the chest where your own breath answers. In the temples of Karnak and Heliopolis, when the sun reached its zenith, the high priests opened the inner doors to let the light fall directly on the golden statues of the gods. For a single instant, the boundary between heaven and earth disappeared. The statues seemed to breathe. The priests called this moment Zep Tepi, the first time, the recreation of creation itself. And then the doors closed again, and darkness reclaimed the hall. Centuries passed. Dynasties fell, languages changed, faiths rose upon the same dust. But gold kept its silence. When Alexander came, he took Egypt's treasures not for worship but for conquest. When Rome followed, it melted the sacred into coin. For a moment, there is no separation, the living and the ancient breathing together, one rhythm shared. And still, the desert did not protest. It knows that all things return to it in the end. Even now, the wind uncovers flakes of gilded leaf in forgotten ruins, tiny pieces of yesterday's dawn. Under modern light, they seem fragile, almost weightless, yet they still burn with a color that refuses to dull. The atoms remain untouched, as if carrying within them a small sun that time itself cannot extinguish. Some nights, during the equinox, when the moon is low and the pyramids cast long, cold shadows, the sand near their bases glows faintly, not with reflection, but with memory. Grains once brushed by gold, long ground to dust, still hold a trace of their former light. Walk there, and your footprints shimmer for a heartbeat before the wind erases them. Perhaps that is what the ancients truly meant when they called gold eternal. Not the metal, but the idea, the reminder that light can be buried, scattered, stolen, and yet still return. And in that stillness, a thought arrives as quiet as moonlight, that everything which shines once will shine again, somewhere, in some quieter form. The desert, too, dreams of that return. Each dawn it waits for the first ray of sun to strike the stones, and when it comes, the entire plateau seems to breathe. For a moment, the sands shimmer like molten glass, and the air fills with the faint, metallic scent of memory. Then it fades, leaving only stillness. Some say the desert hoards gold deep within itself, that entire rivers of it lie sleeping beneath the dunes. Others say that the true treasure is not in the earth but above it, the light that falls endlessly and never belongs to anyone. Perhaps both are the same. The Egyptians understood that. They saw no boundary between sky and sand, between the shining above and the shining below. Perhaps the pyramid was never built to house the dead at all. To them, the desert was not barren but sacred, the horizon where light and death became one continuous dream, and so they built their monuments not to claim the sun, but to return it. Every golden capstone, every gilded amulet, every polished sarcophagus was a way of giving light back to its source. The desert only borrowed it for safekeeping. Tonight, as the wind drifts over Giza, the sand moves in waves that catch the last breath of starlight. You could almost mistake it for the shimmer of gold. But it is something softer, the desert remembering the color of its dream. Perhaps that is where all light goes in the end, not upward but inward into the quiet places that still know how to keep a secret. And perhaps, beneath the endless dunes, the ancient river of gold still flows, slow and soundless, waiting for another dawn to wake it. Because gold was never just metal. Perhaps it was built to remind the living that even stone has a heartbeat. It was the desert's memory of the sun, a dream that never truly ended, only learned how to sleep. The night over Giza is endless, black as basalt, soft as ash. The wind slows as it passes over the pyramid's worn edges, curling into its corridors like a secret returning home. Far beneath those great layers of stone, in a shaft seldom spoken of and rarely mapped, lies a small slab, unbroken, untouched. Behind it, the air has not moved in 4,000 years. They call it the sealed door. It is not grand. It bears no inscription, no sign of gods or kings. Just a limestone panel, the color of ancient bone, fitted so perfectly that not even a whisper of sand seeps through. It rests at the end of a narrow tunnel, barely wide enough for a man to crawl. And yet, it may be the purest mystery Egypt has ever kept. And so the desert continues its slow exhalation. The door was first glimpsed in 1993, when a small robotic camera, built by engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink, crept up the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber. For more than 60 meters, it climbed through the narrow passage, its light catching dust that hadn't moved since Khufu's time. Then suddenly the tunnel ended. A smooth, pale stone blocked the way, polished like the inside of a seashell. At its base, two small copper fittings gleamed. Not handles, but something more symbolic, like the eyes of a lock that refused to remember its key. The camera pressed closer. Behind the door, the sensors registered a void. Not large, perhaps no more than a hand's breadth of space. But beyond that void, another barrier waited, unseen. A door behind a door, as if the pyramid were exhaling secrets one breath at a time. The stars continued to shimmer over the limestone skin. When the images reached Cairo, the Egyptologists fell silent. No one expected such precision, such secrecy, so deep within the structure. Some believed it was a false door, a common feature in tombs, carved to allow the spirit of the dead to pass through the stone world into the divine. Others argued it was functional, part of the ventilation system designed to keep the pyramid breathing. But those who saw the copper fittings disagreed. They were not placed for air. They were placed for ritual. Gantenbrink called it the door to the stars. He believed the shafts were aligned to Orion and Sirius, the same constellations worshipped as Osiris and Isis, the celestial pair whose union promised rebirth. To him, the sealed stone was not meant for human entry at all. The hum beneath the sand drifts on, unchanged, unseen. It was the gate through which the king's soul departed each night to sail among the undying stars. Years later, in 2002, another small robot named Pyramid Rover returned to the same shaft. It drilled a pinhole through the limestone panel, careful as a heartbeat, and slid a fiber-optic camera into the gap. The image it sent back was simple: another smooth stone, untouched, waiting. Between them, a thin pocket of air, sealed for millennia. Nothing more. And yet, the world could not look away. For that small void felt like an unfinished sentence, a pause between breaths. If nothing lay beyond, why the door? And if something did, what could it be that demanded such silence? A song of breath beneath the stone, waiting for those who still know how to listen. Historians found no mention of such a design in any known pyramid. No inscriptions, no diagrams, no precedents. The builders had left it without explanation, trusting time itself to keep the secret. And time, faithful as ever, obeyed. Even today, the door remains closed. Modern probes, using muon scans and ultrasonic mapping, have confirmed that the space beyond is larger than once thought. Perhaps a small chamber, perhaps a passage turning deeper still. But the stone endures, smooth and unmoved, as if guarding the breath of something ancient. The Egyptians believed the soul could die of curiosity. To look beyond what was veiled was to break the rhythm of eternity. That is why their temples are built in stages. Darkness leading to light, mystery to revelation, but never all at once. Night leans gently over Giza, and the desert turns to silver dust. Each door opened only when the initiate was ready. Perhaps the sealed panel beneath Giza is the final threshold, meant not for us, but for another kind of traveler, one who understands that the greatest truths are meant to be entered in silence, not discovery. Some scholars speak of resonance, that the chamber behind the door may vibrate at a frequency untouched by human sound, tuned to the earth's deep pulse. They say the copper rods could have once conducted energy, sound, or prayer, the living vibration of ritual. When the priests of Heliopolis sang the hymns of Ra, their voices were said to awaken the very stones. Perhaps the door still remembers that music. Others believe it guards a fragment of history itself. A papyrus, a symbol, an empty box meant only to preserve the idea of secrecy. An eternal reminder that knowledge without reverence becomes ruin. The pyramid was not built to tell us everything. It was built to remind us how to listen. The wind slows, as if it too remembers the weight of what lies beneath. Those who have stood before that tiny slab say the air feels different there. Thicker, cooler, as though the pyramid draws one long inhale, holding it endlessly. Sound does not carry well in those tunnels. Even breathing feels too loud. And when light touches the door, the copper fittings reflect faint halos that look almost alive, pulsing faintly with the heartbeat of the generator above. A trick of the lens, perhaps, or perhaps not. No one knows what lies behind it. Some say a chamber of light, others, a void of silence. A few whisper that it leads nowhere at all, that the builders placed it there simply to teach patience to those who would one day seek it. A doorway built to remind us that not every path is meant to open. There are places under this plateau where the torchlight trembles, not from air or movement, but from something unseen, as if the very darkness is breathing with you. There are legends among the locals. They say that at certain hours of the night, when the desert is completely still and the wind has paused between breaths, the pyramid hums. A low tone rises from the sand, so soft it feels rather than sounds. A vibration that passes through the bones, into the chest, until the heart begins to match it. And then it fades, leaving behind the echo of something vast, unspoken. Perhaps that is the door's true purpose. Not to hide, but to resonate. A lock that opens not to hands, but to harmony. A threshold tuned to those who remember the right rhythm of silence. If you were to crawl through those narrow shafts now, your lamp trembling against the rough limestone walls, you would eventually see it. The pale stone waiting in the dark, flawless, indifferent, eternal. You might reach out to touch it, but the air would stop you, dense and alive, as though guarding its own breath. And in that moment you would understand. Some knowledge is not meant to be unveiled, only approached. And in those depths, where silence grows thicker than stone, explorers once spoke of a chamber that was never meant to be found. Some mysteries exist to protect our wonder, not end it. The sealed door will remain closed long after we have forgotten its location. It does not need witnesses. It is complete in its secrecy, whole in its silence. A perfect question carved into the heart of the world. And maybe, behind it, there is nothing at all, only air, still holding the warmth of the hands that placed the stone there 5,000 years ago. Air that has never known sunlight, never felt breath, never heard sound. The purest silence the earth has ever kept. Perhaps that is the treasure. Perhaps that is the message. They called it later the chamber of unfinished light. That not all doors were meant to open. Some were built simply so that silence could have a place to live. And so, beneath the sleeping desert, the Great Pyramid continues to breathe. Its passages echo softly with time, its heart sealed by a door that guards nothing but the mystery itself. And somewhere in that darkness, the air still waits, holding its breath for a world that may never learn how to listen. The dunes around Giza gleam like quiet fire under the winter stars. Each ridge glows pale, each hollow drinks the night, and in the distance, the pyramids rise like frozen constellations, 3 mountains of memory echoing the heavens they were built to mirror. Somewhere above them, Orion leans toward the horizon, his belt still tracing the same angle the builders saw 5,000 years ago. Between his stars and these stones lies a space no chart can measure, the thin veil between sky and memory. The priests once said that heaven had chambers, that above the firmament lay halls of light where souls rested before they were reborn. No record mentions it directly, and just as the pyramids held rooms for the dead to dream beneath the earth, so too, they believed, did the sky contain its own tombs, sealed, silent, eternal. They called it the Chamber of the Stars. The idea was not metaphor. It was architecture in light. To the Egyptians, the sky was not void but structure, a great body supported by unseen pillars. The goddess Nut arched above the world, her skin a field of living stars, her breath the wind, her voice the hum between constellations. Each night she swallowed the sun and gave birth to it again at dawn. And within her, it was said, the souls of the just took refuge, drifting between her ribs of light, waiting for rebirth. The astronomer priests of Heliopolis spent lifetimes watching her. They saw patterns others missed. The slow drift of Sirius, the pulse of Orion's shoulder, the way certain stars brightened and dimmed like breathing. No hieroglyph bears its name. They recorded it all, carving their findings into limestone and memory. One inscription, half faded on the walls of Dendera, calls the Milky Way the River of Souls. To cross it was to leave time behind. In their night vigils, the priests built instruments of astonishing precision. Citing rods of palm wood, polished stone circles, cords stretched tight between pegs aligned with the north. They measured the rise of Sothis, the dog star, and knew that her reappearance marked the flood of the Nile. But beyond observation lay devotion. For to them, stars were not distant fires. They were openings, eyes of gods through which eternity watched itself. One priest, known only from fragments, wrote of a ritual performed once each decade in the courtyard of the Sun Temple. At the hour before dawn, when the last star still burned and the first light trembled beneath the horizon, a small group climbed the temple's high platform carrying bowls of black basalt filled with oil. But scattered among fragments of journals, in the letters of 19th-century archaeologists and the murmurs of the local guides who led them, the same story repeats, of a sealed corridor where light behaved like a living thing. They placed them in a circle, lit them one by one, and sang the names of the constellations as they appeared. When the chant reached Orion, the wind would rise. They said his spirit Sa, they called him, descended briefly into the flames, blessing the earth before returning to the heavens. For a few heartbeats, the boundary between stone and star disappeared. The temple became an echo of the chamber above. And yet, the priests knew the connection was incomplete. Something was missing, a bridge between the geometry of the earth and the living pattern of the heavens. That bridge, they believed, was sound. Within the Great Pyramid, every corridor, every chamber, hums faintly in response to the low frequencies of the world. Modern measurements confirm it. Vibrations between 30 and 100 hertz resonate through the granite. When the first explorers descended the Great Pyramid in the 1800s, they carried more curiosity than caution. It is as if the monument itself listens. The ancients may have sensed this intuitively. When they chanted, the tones rose into the air shafts, up toward the stars, carrying the human voice into the eternal. Each pyramid was a hymn made solid, a stairway not of steps but of harmonics. It is easy to forget that these people lived by rhythm of river, of season, of breath. Their entire world pulsed with cycles. The waxing and waning of Sirius, the rise and retreat of the Nile, the repeating symmetries of sunrise and death. To them, the soul did not depart, turned like the constellations. It slept in the chamber of the stars until it was called again by name. When Napoleon scholars mapped the heavens above Egypt in 1799, they noted that the three pyramids aligned perfectly with the stars of Orion's belt. Colonel Howard Weiss, John Paring, Giovanni Caviglia, men of dust and candle wax, followed narrow shafts carved for reasons unknown. They did not know that the same alignment had been recorded in ancient texts millennia before, that the priests had already seen the pattern and built their monuments to match it. They were not pointing to heaven. They were mirroring it. Some modern physicists, scanning the pyramid with cosmic rays, found something unexpected, voids in the upper body, unseen by any human eye, their shapes eerily symmetrical. The data show long, narrow spaces running at angles no one can yet explain. The scientists called them anomalies. But to the old priests, such hollows might have been deliberate, empty lungs for the pyramid's breath, or vessels meant to resonate with the music of the stars. Perhaps those are the true forgotten chambers, not rooms for bodies, but for echoes. Places where heaven itself could dwell for a moment within the architecture of the earth. On certain nights, when the desert air is still and Orion hangs directly above the apex of Khufu's pyramid, travelers swear they hear a faint vibration, like wind caught in a harp. Some led upward toward chambers now famous. Others sank into earth and vanished, ending in abrupt, hand-cut walls as smooth as glass. It hums along the edges of the stones, fading as suddenly as it begins. Some call it imagination. Others say it is the earth remembering the hymn. Inside the Queen's chamber, the air shafts point toward Sirius and Orion, the very stars the priests sang to. When sunlight pierces the cracks above the entrance, it falls precisely on those openings, illuminating them for a few brief minutes each year. No one knows how they achieved such accuracy without modern instruments. But perhaps they did not need tools. Perhaps the sky itself was the blueprint. They simply listened long enough for it to tell them where to begin. Every civilization seeks its reflection. But one shaft, half collapsed beneath limestone debris, caught their attention. For Egypt, that reflection was in the night sky, an image of their eternal kingdom. To look upward was to remember who they were. To die was to rise into that memory, to rest in the chamber of the stars. And maybe, in some way, the pyramid succeeded. For even now, when the lights of the modern world dim and the Milky Way returns to visibility over the plateau, the scene repeats. 3 stars above, 3 pyramids below. The same pattern, unchanged after 5,000 years. The architecture of earth and heaven still intertwined, still breathing in unison. Perhaps that is why the pyramid endures, not because it defied time, but because it aligned with it. Its angles, its proportions, its silences all tuned to the eternal rhythm of the sky. It was neither straight nor symmetrical, as if carved by hands that lost their faith halfway through. It was never meant to last forever. It was meant to move forever, to hum with the stars until both light and memory fade. If you stand there now, beneath the endless dark, and let your eyes drift between the horizon and the constellations, you might feel it. A slow, patient pulse connecting ground and heaven. It rises through the soles of your feet, through bone and blood, until your breath matches the breath of the world. For a moment, You are part of the pattern. Another spark in the great chamber where all souls wait, all names dissolve, and the stars keep their quiet vigil. Perhaps that is the secret Egypt always knew, that we do not look up to the stars, we return to them, that the chamber of the stars is not above or below, but within, the space between one heartbeat and the next, where silence begins to shine. And somewhere, in that silence, the sky still hums, and the stone still answers, both remembering the same dream, that nothing truly ends, it only changes shape. They found it below the level of the king's chamber, just beyond a fault in the stone that seemed to breathe cold air. The horizon waits in a hush that belongs only to the hour before dawn. The stars, bright all night above the desert, begin to fade, and the wind pauses as if listening for something ancient to stir. Across the plateau, the outlines of the pyramids emerge from shadow, slow, deliberate, immense. Their forms seem less like monuments now and more like memories rising from sleep. Between them and the softening east, a faint blush of light gathers, brushing the air with color that feels almost human. There is a temple here, not large, not grand, but quiet. Its columns lean with time, its floor cracked by the same patience that split mountains. No tourist path leads to it. It lies half swallowed by sand, half remembered by history, built perhaps for Kafir, perhaps for someone older still. Locals call it the temple that waits for the dawn. Caviglia's notes describe a passage where the torch flame dimmed, though no wind was felt. At first glance, it seems empty, but look longer, and the stones begin to breathe. Their surfaces are warm even in the night chill, as though holding sunlight from another age. In the silence, you can almost hear the faint scrape of bronze tools, the rhythm of ancient hands smoothing the limestone into calm. Each block fits so perfectly that the joints vanish. No boundary between one stone and the next, just a continuous, sleeping skin. It is said that this temple was built not to house the gods, but to teach the sun how to rise again. The priests of the Old Kingdom came here in darkness. They brought no idols, no offerings, only flame. Before the first light of morning, they filled the inner court with lamps, their glow trembling against the columns. Each flame represented one heartbeat of the world, small, fragile, yet eternal. The walls shimmered faintly, not with paint or carving, but with something granular embedded in the rock itself. They chanted not for life or death, but for balance. The return of the sun through the eastern gate, the rebirth of time. When the first rays crept through the open doorway, striking the altar at the center, every lamp was extinguished. The priests bowed their heads and whispered, "The sun remembers." Then they waited in silence, listening to the light fill the air like water rising through stone. Archaeologists have traced the foundations of such solar temples throughout Egypt, from Abu Ghorab to Heliopolis, each aligned with the path of dawn. This one, near Giza, was small by comparison, but perfect in orientation. Its axis points precisely to where the sun breaks the horizon at the equinox. Even now, when the light returns each spring and autumn, it travels straight down the corridor, touching the farthest wall for only a few minutes before withdrawing again into shadow. Those who have witnessed it describe a feeling that is difficult to name. Not awe, not fear, but something quieter, like the heart remembering its own rhythm. Within the temple, fragments of inscriptions remain, brief, almost hesitant lines. Under the flickering flame, those grains flashed pale blue, then sank again into darkness. He who stands in silence brings forth the light. The dawn is not born, it is remembered. Scholars translate these as metaphor, but perhaps they were instructions. Perhaps the priests believed that the sun rose only because someone here was waiting for it. To the Egyptians, dawn was a covenant. Each night, the sun god Ra descended into the underworld, sailing through 12 hours of darkness on his bark of flame. He faced serpents of chaos, the devourers of order, the shadows of unmaking. At each hour he was aided by the prayers of the living, chants, offerings, and names spoken into the dark. When he reached the final gate, the horizon opened, and the world was renewed. If the prayers ceased, the sun would not return. Quartz, perhaps, or something older, ground fine and mixed into the mortar like dust from a star. The world would drown in unending night. That was why this temple mattered. It was the breath that kept the cycle alive. Every morning, the priest stood within its sanctuary and whispered the world awake. The Greeks who came later misunderstood. They saw only the architecture, the columns, the measurements, the symmetry. They did not hear the soundless hymn that had once filled these halls. But the desert remembers. At the equinox, when the wind is still and the horizon glows pale, the air inside the temple vibrates faintly, as if an invisible voice were humming beneath the stone. Engineers measuring the resonance have found a low frequency around 110 Hz, the same pitch used in temple chants throughout the ancient world. Later, when Auguste Mariette came to Egypt, he too heard whispers of that passage. Coincidence, perhaps, or memory. Some evenings, when the moon rises instead of the sun, the light reverses its path. Silver replaces gold, cool reflection for warm flame. In that inversion, the temple seems to breathe differently, slower, almost like sleep. The columns cast long shadows that cross each other like fingers folded in prayer. Feels less like a ruin than a body resting, waiting once more to wake. The archaeologist Auguste Mariette once wrote, "In every Egyptian stone there is patience. It is the patience of the dawn that knows it will come again." Standing here, you understand what he meant. The pyramid, the tomb, the temple, all of them are expressions of that same patience. He was a quieter man than Vice, less concerned with glory, more with reverence. Not monuments to death, but rehearsals for return. To the ancient builders, light was not simply the end of darkness. It was the proof that nothing, once begun, is ever truly lost. When the first edge of the sun appears now, the plateau changes in an instant. The color drains from shadow. The air warms, carrying the faint scent of stone dust and morning wind. The pyramids blaze briefly, their sides catching fire without flame. And in that moment the temple wakes. Light flows down its corridor, brushing every stone like a hand greeting an old friend. The silence deepens instead of breaking. A silence filled, not empty. His workers, digging near the base of the pyramid, uncovered fragments of limestone with the same inner gleam. Tiny veins of crystal, still catching light centuries after burial. The same silence the priests once guarded. The same silence from which all beginnings are born. If you close your eyes then, you can almost hear it. The soundless chorus of centuries folding together. The breath of the earth aligning once more with the breath of the sky. The desert stirs, the stones glow, and the horizon opens like an eyelid remembering light. Perhaps the temple still waits for us. Not as pilgrims, but as witnesses, to stand quietly and let the dawn speak first. To learn, as the ancients did, that the world does not wake because we demand it, but because we listen. The light continues to climb, spreading across the plateau, softening every edge. The pyramids fade back into their ancient calm. The stars retreat beyond sight, and the temple, having done its work, falls still again, breathing, waiting, dreaming of the next sunrise. Mariette wrote, "Some stones hold their own dawn, for dawn will come again as it always does, because someone will be waiting, and in that waiting lies the oldest prayer the desert has ever known." The desert never truly sleeps. It only changes the rhythm of its breathing. When night falls, the dunes soften into ocean, and the pyramids rise like islands of memory. Steady, unblinking, unbroken. They have seen the light of every dawn since time began, and yet they never turn to watch it. They simply wait, as all sacred things do, for the world to remember its own pulse. We have wandered through their silence, from the breath beneath the stone, to the chamber of unfinished light, from the scribe who spoke to the stars, to the architects who shaped the dark. We have stood beside the queen who chose to vanish, and listened for the river that still moves beneath the sand. The ancient Egyptians, he believed, had known that light could be trapped. We have followed the trembling line of paint that may have lied, and laid our hands upon the stone that remembered the sky. We have walked through the desert that dreamed of gold, and stood before the sealed door that guards its own silence. And above it all, the stars have kept their watch, the same slow turning that guided the first builders, the same pattern reflected in every block, every breath, every pause. Perhaps none of it was meant to be explained. Perhaps the truest knowledge of Egypt was never written on papyrus or carved in relief, but carried in vibration, the hum of earth beneath stone, the resonance of human breath inside granite halls. A music without sound, an answer without words. If you listen closely, even now you can still feel it. The faint pulse underfoot, the whisper in the wind that moves through the plateau. It is the sound of time continuing, the voice of stone remembering its maker. In their temples at Dendra and Philae, the columns were carved with vessels and serpents, rays emerging from lotus flowers, symbols often mistaken for myth. The ancients believed that death was only a deeper kind of breathing, that what was buried was not gone, but waiting to exhale again as light. Every sunrise proved them right. Every dawn was resurrection. Every shadow only a pause before radiance. And maybe that is the secret Egypt has been keeping all along. That eternity is not endless time, but perfect rhythm. The inhale of creation, the exhale of return. The silence between those breaths is where we find our place. So rest now. The world will turn without hurry. But within those symbols lay a philosophy. That divine illumination could dwell inside matter, sleeping like a breath inside a flute. The sand will shift, the stars will hum, the river will continue its hidden journey beneath the earth. Somewhere, deep within the heart of the pyramid, the last sealed door is still waiting, still breathing, still dreaming of light. And above it all, the sky, endless, patient, ancient, leans close once more, whispering the same promise it has always whispered. Nothing is lost. Nothing is finished. The breath continues. The builders of Giza might have tried to capture that same illumination, not to worship it, but to preserve it, to bind the sky within the stone. And yet, this chamber was never finished. Its floor was uneven, the ceiling jagged. No carvings, no sarcophagus, no offering table. It felt like a thought interrupted. Some modern archaeologists suggest it was an abandoned project, a miscalculation in geometry. Others, less certain, believe it was intentional, that it was designed to remain incomplete, a place where perfection was forbidden. The Egyptians held a sacred respect for unfinished things. To leave something incomplete was to acknowledge the divine beyond human reach. Even gods, they said, required a shadow. In the imagination of later scholars, this chamber of unfinished light became a metaphor, a place where light itself had been sealed before its birth. But among those who have descended into the real cavities below the pyramid, the descriptions persist with quiet consistency. A palpable stillness, an impression that light thickens there, as though the air itself carries a faint luminescence even in total dark. Quartz, of course, refracts and stores energy. Modern studies have shown that crystalline limestone can retain static charges, producing faint corona glows when struck. Perhaps the ancient architects noticed this. Perhaps their torches once revealed what our electric lamps now overpower. But to them, that shimmer was not science. It was spirit. They saw within it the breath of Ra, the sun made eternal, a reminder that even in the deepest tomb, dawn could still exist.